Well, I made it. I just kept going, even through everything that happened. And now, I finally reached the end. It still feels rather surreal that I'm even here. I thought this day would never come. Especially after that change in career path. I guess I should briefly touch on that. It was early one evening, and I just went out to get something. It wasn't finding the gun that bothered me. What bothered me was, it reminded me of whose house I had to go paint. The film takes place over a course of 50 years, following a man named Frank Sheeran, from his days as a truck driver to becoming a prolific hitman for the Mafia. As we follow Frank's journey, we see how the mob played a part in some crucial moments in 20th century America, culminating with the murder of Jimmy Hoffa. The movie opens with two crucial moments: Frank in the retirement home, alone after neglecting his family for a life of crime, wearing the ring that Russell Bufalino gave him, and the watch from Jimmy Hoffa on the same hand. We then go back in time to Frank, Russell, and their wives, beginning the road trip up to Detroit for the wedding of Bill Bufalino's daughter. Now at this point in the chronology, Jimmy Hoffa had been at odds with Tony Pro and the mob as a whole for some time, and it would be during this trip that his murder would be sanctioned. What's interesting about him wearing the ring and the watch on the same hand is that those are essentially all that he has left of Russell and Jimmy, his two closest friends. Coincidentally, they had both given him those gifts at the same event, around the same time. And seeing them both being worn on the same hand is pretty symbolic of the contrast of Frank. He's loyal to the mob in that they point and he shoots, but Jimmy was his best friend, likely his only true friend that wasn't connected to the life of crime. The movie jumps back and forth quite a bit through time. In fact, within the first 7 minutes of the movie, we've introduced to 3 different points. 2000, where we meet Frank, an older, remorseful man who's lived the life of crime. 1975, where Frank is middle-aged. He's been a hitman for the mob for some time, but he's also anxious as the tension between Jimmy and the mob has reached an all-time high. He doesn't know if things will be settled or if Jimmy gets whacked. The last point we're introduced to is in 1956, where we see Frank as a food truck driver. For a brief moment, we see Frank as an honest, hardworking man who just wants to provide for his family. It's by pure coincidence or fate, it's by accident that his truck needs repairing and he runs into Russell, even though he doesn't introduce himself. One thing that I noticed right away was the difference in ages between Frank. The combination of CGI and makeup actually does a really good job making these characters look younger. However, it can only go back so far. And I think this is where Robert De Niro sort of got the short end of the stick in this department. Joe Pesci is meant to be the older guy, the mentor figure to Frank. So when he has gray hair and still looks relatively old, it's not as distracting because the story is told through Frank's eyes, and through his perception, Russell has always been the older figure to him. But for Robert De Niro's case, he's supposed to be in his 30s during this part. I understood that they went back and used references from his older films when he was actually in his 30s. Even with the advancements in CGI and all the de-aging technology that they had, he still looks old enough to be a grandfather. And there's only so much CGI and makeup can do to hide the fact that he's playing someone much younger than he actually is. When he first meets Russell, it seems like a chance encounter, that he'll never see him again. Later on though, as he's relaxing during his off time, he gets introduced to another member of the Bufalino crime family, Skinny Razor. In a strange twist of fate, it feels almost as if the mob life is reaching out for Frank. Almost as if the mob life literally chose him. Now, of course, what attracts him to this idea is the prospect of earning a little more money on the side. So he starts just skimming some steaks off the top. A couple hindquarters here and there, and then substituting them with hindquarters that were delivered earlier. First glance, it seems like he might actually get away with this. He'll just continue on with his life, albeit stealing meat and delivering it to the mob. Right?
What the fuck is this?
So Frank gets busted, and he has to get a lawyer.
Hey,
Who does he call?
Sheeran. Am I saying that right?
Yeah, you said right.
Under the contract, thanks to Jimmy Hoffa.
Ray Romano is outstanding in his supporting role as Bill Buffalino. He's a fairly critical reoccurring character, showing up at various crucial moments throughout the story. Now, most people these days know Ray Romano as the voice of Manny from the Ice Age movies. So to see him in a role like this is definitely a head-turner. This is the same guy who spent the better part of the last few years voicing a woolly mammoth in an animated movie series entirely aimed at young children. Now, I'm not saying that he should have gotten an Oscar for this or anything like that, but I liked what he brought to the table. Martin Scorsese knew how to work Romano's knack for comedic timing into the character of Bill Buffalino. It's a role where you might not think too much of it at first. Romano's playing a dramatic character for a change. That's great. But as someone who's watched this movie more times than I would like to admit, Ray Romano's performance is one that I've come to appreciate.
You know, I don't care whether you did it or not. That makes no difference to me.
Yeah, I know.
I'm here to defend you. Right?
Right. What do you want to know? You want to know if I did it or not?
Well,
So, being the cousin of a crime boss, Bill Buffalino is able to get Frank Sheeran off the stealing charges.
All rise. Court is in session.
That right there was Martin Scorsese's voice cameo. After successfully getting Frank acquitted, Bill introduces him to his cousin Russell. Frank was already seen as a favorable person, thanks to him stealing meat for a skinny razor. But since he refused to rat on the mob, he's proven to not only be a good accomplice, but a loyal one. It lands him in good graces with Angelo Bruno, who was made the new boss of Philadelphia. One rather morbid thing that this movie does is show how these various gangsters died. In the case of Sally Bugs, we actually get to see his demise.
Sally, what's doing?
Hey, Irish.
It's Martin Scorsese's way of essentially showing the audience that it doesn't matter what ranking you are in the Mafia, death can come for you at any moment. Another detail that I notice upon multiple viewings is that Frank likely was the one who carried out these hits. Every time a character's death is shown, it's immediately after Frank mentions them or meets them. The only ones who have natural deaths are the ones who Frank never mentions or is never seen meeting. So, now that he's officially indebted to the Buffalino crime family, he starts doing out little things for them. He gets his first taste of mob violence when he's told to bring someone who owes Skinny Razor money to him. He's a World War II veteran, so he's no stranger to violence, but this is the first time where he's using violence as a means to extort people.
Where's the money?
You don't have it.
What do you mean you don't have it?
He said something, I don't know, about his mother.
Wait, no, stop. Don't tell me. Let me guess. His mother died and the funeral set him back. Yeah?
Yeah.
Fucking dying over and over for the last 10 years.
I just want to mention that Bobby Cannavale is really good as Skinny Razor. Again, a small part, but a memorable one all the same. He adds a flash of deadpan humor to the character, which really shows him as this apathetic mobster.
How am I supposed to get home?
Take a fucking bus! Have his mother pick him up.
As time goes on and Frank does more and more favors, he gets a taste for mob-style violence. He gets a little bit of a kick out of physically threatening people and hurting them when things don't go his way, or when they do something that ticks him off. This violent temper of his is experienced firsthand by his daughter Peggy. After being shoved by a grocery store owner, he takes her down to have a little chat. And, well, you know how I said earlier that there's only so much CGI can do to cover up the fact that Robert De Niro is an old man? This is what I'm talking about. It doesn't matter if he's supposed to be in his 30s or his 40s. He still kicks like he's pushing 80. I suppose you could look past it and just let your imagination do the work, but I could see why it would ruin the moment for some. I don't think it's as laughably bad as some people might say it is, but yeah, it's definitely an awkward moment. They should have shot this differently, like so they could have used a body double, or heck, they should have used a younger or maybe even get a younger actor to play a younger Frank Sheeran. Despite Frank moving like he's already a senior citizen, it does introduce another reoccurring detail that adds to this story, and that's how it occasionally shows things from Peggy Sheeran's perspective. She's a bit unnerved that there's a bunch of these strange and unsavory characters showing up to be a part of their lives, whether it's something as innocent as her sister's baptism, or a group of them staring daggers at Jimmy Hoffa while she dances with him. As Frank Sheeran says himself, he has more kids, so he needs more money. And with that, he's looking for work, no matter what kind. This is where he meets Whispers. The other Whispers. As he's about to go and blow up a laundromat, he's stopped by Skinny Razor, who brings him to Angela Bruno. Turns out the place that he was about to bomb was owned by the Jew mob. Thankfully, Russell Buffalino caught wind of what Frank was doing and stopped him before he could carry it out. This brings attention to something that I love about the movie's dialogue. There's a lot of subtext, or saying things without really saying it, which leaves the audience to decipher a statement's true meaning.
I'm sorry, I should have checked. Can I give him his money back?
He won't need it. You can keep it.
No, I don't want no trouble. I just give it back to him and I'm okay.
He won't need it.
Harvey Keitel is another actor in this movie who has very little to do, but he absolutely crushes it. This is his only scene in the movie where there's an actual back and forth between him and Frank. Yet I'd argue that this scene in itself could be a short film. In fact, a big reason why the smaller parts in this movie work is because Scorsese knows that this is all the time they have and to use it wisely. Look at Crazy Joe Gala, also known as Joey the Blonde. This is a character who has very limited screen time. In fact, he only has about 10 minutes, if that. But once again, Martin Scorsese's brilliant use of the character and the actor shines through. That's another thing that this movie does so well. It knows how to work the little things to set a tone and give us all we need to know about a scene, about a character, about a side story. On that note, Joe Pesci goes completely against type in this movie. In other Martin Scorsese movies, he's known as the hot-headed loudmouth who tries to fight anyone and everyone. He's abrasive, violent, tries to always get his own way. In this role, he's quieter, more reserved, and his life doesn't end with him getting whacked. Although, it does leave him with a lifelong regret.
Jimmy was a good man. You know? A nice family, too, huh? I picked us over him. Fuck him.
For the first 45 minutes of the movie, there's small hints and nudges at Jimmy Hoffa. We don't see Al Pacino as Hoffa until the fateful phone call.
Hiya, Frank. This is Jimmy Hoffa.
Yeah. Glad to meet you.
Well, glad to meet you, too, even if it's over the phone. I heard you paint houses.
Those 5 fateful words would change Frank's life forever. Pacino's performance is also a divergence from past notable roles. Don't get me wrong, he has his fair share of over-the-top bursts of rage, but they feel reasonable.
Damn it! How do you do that? How stupid can you be? Kennedy has got his nose up my ass everywhere I go.
You don't know that they're hounding me?
They're looking at everything I do, and you let this happen in public? You're giving it to him.
I'm going to jail. You understand?
He's not some psychotic crime lord or bank robber who's getting angry at the littlest things. He's the president of the biggest union in America, trying to fight the good fight and make an honest living, who's being hounded by the government, and when he attempts to clean house, he gets hounded by the mob. As we see Jimmy try and run an honest union, with occasional loans to the mob, we see how organized crime has had ties to important moments in America during the 20th century. Whether it's running guns for the Bay of Pigs invasion, trying to get Castro out of Cuba so they can get their casinos back in, or JFK's presidency, from using dead people's names to rig an election for him, from his own brother going after them, to eventually his assassination. This is something where The Irishman really shines. it's not just a story about Frank Sheeran, this one guy in the mob. It's a story about how the Mafia had a hand in some of the most notable events in American history. One notable example is the Italian-American Civil Rights League, which was more or less a front for giving the Mafia a more positive perception. In fact, they actually succeeded in having The Godfather remove any references to or using the word Mafia in the movie. In classic Scorsese fashion, there are some funny moments, whether they're intentional or not. The movie's not trying to be funny or anything, it's just... it's a character having an authentic moment, and that moment just happened to be funny.
What are you quitting for?
But wait, you're gonna call me a motherfucker? You could talk to them like that. You can't talk to me like that.
No, that didn't apply to you. What are you
Didn't apply?
saying?
Then you gotta let me know it didn't apply to me. I'm right there
I
standing
didn't
there.
even see you standing there. What
I'm
are you
standing right there, Jimmy. What are you talking about?
But it didn't apply to you. What else can I say?
A guy with big ears named Hunt will meet you there.
What are you looking at? You looking at my ears?
Sorry?
My ears. Are you looking at my ears?
Your ears? No.
I had an operation, so there's no need for anyone looking at my ears anymore.
Yeah, well, I ain't looking at your ears.
Jimmy.
No, it's not gonna blow over. How's it gonna blow over? They're never gonna forget that I gave money to Nixon.
On the whole, it seems that Jimmy Hoffa and the mob have a pretty good relationship. The Teamsters are getting new members, the mob is getting some loans from the pension fund. Things look great. But heads are still gonna butt. There is one thorn in Jimmy's side. Anthony Provenzano, also known as Tony Pro. What's interesting is that they casually name drop him right before his big introduction, but he has a very brief appearance during the segment where the Mafia is rigging the election for JFK. Another one of those fine details where a character who you thought was just going to be a throwaway ends up being important to the plot. Stephen Graham serves as a perfect foil to Pacino's Hoffa. Pro's nonchalant attitude and aggravating demeanor contrast with Jimmy's rigorous ways. Hoffa is very punctual and proper, showing up to a meeting in a suit and always arriving on time. Tony Pro, on the other hand, just shows up in shorts and 15 minutes late. Their little rivalry carries over into the second half of the movie, as Hoffa tries to regain control of the Teamsters and clean house. However, in his absence, his vice president, Frank Fitzsimmons, has been giving interest-free loans to the Mafia, essentially turning the Teamsters pension fund into a cash cow for them. Once Hoffa starts vocalizing his crusade against the mob, they realize that something's gotta be done. Either talk him out of it, or have his house painted. With working and being friends with Russell Bufalino comes an understanding of how he works. Frank is able to tell by a look if Russell wants somebody whacked. Looking at this scene, when Fitz is giving out loans willy-nilly, but Dorfman is stopping them from coming through.
So what do you want me to do?
No, not that. Not that.
What'd I say?
Joe. Now listen. You can't say that stuff like that here, okay?
One day, Bugs was seen walking into the Federal Building.
He didn't tell anybody one word.
It's a not-so-subtle detail that conveys an entire conversation. Even in the voiceovers, we never feel bombarded with unnecessary exposition. It goes without saying that Martin Scorsese has a way with voiceovers. You're not just getting information, you're getting an insight on the character who's speaking. Again, it's all about that authenticity. This feels like the character who is speaking to us, and not just something that was put together in post. The whole Joey the Blonde segment is a perfect example that shows that the Mafia has these strict rules in place for a reason. And if you go against them, well... Once Hoffa gets out of prison, he begins his crusade to take his union back. This causes a back and forth between him and his former VP, with messages. There's almost like a sense of levity to it. There's a jazzy underscore and nobody really gets hurt. Boat blows up, Jimmy gets the message. Car blows up, Fitz gets the message. Jimmy's wife, Jo, gets fired. She gets in the car, turns the engine and... It's a brilliant moment of suspense, and just shows how quickly these little messages can get out of hand. The tension comes to a head when Hoffa announces on public television that he intends to fight the corruption in his union. But the Mafia like getting free money, so he's hoping that he doesn't really mean it, that this is just all for show. At least that's what Russell tells the other mobsters. Knowing that Frank is the perfect middleman between him and Jimmy, he gets Frank to try and talk to him. Jimmy, however, is a stubborn son of a gun, making it clear that he's in it to win and getting the mob out of his union.
You could step down and still run.
No, you don't step down. What do you mean? Russ, you don't step down and run a union. You step down and go to your grave.
A foreboding foreshadow. In classic Scorsese fashion, Jimmy Hoffa's pride is what makes things worse. He even goes as far as to say that he's untouchable. He's got records and tapes of the various mobsters, with the promise that if anything were to happen to him, all that information would be released. This part of the movie does a phenomenal job of making you feel the stakes at play here. They're at a dinner in Frank's honor, a time meant for joy and relaxation, yet Frank spends it worried for Jimmy's safety, and does what he can to prevent a hit. It's also here where he gets the ring from Russell and the watch from Jimmy. It's a very small-scale setting, yet this is the most crucial part of the movie. This is Frank and Russell's last-ditch effort to try and get Jimmy to simmer down and not be so abrasive in his campaign. Despite the best efforts, Russell tells Frank, indirectly, that Jimmy's murder has been sanctioned, and Frank will pull the trigger.
Frank, I had to put you into this thing, or you would never let it happen. And I know you wouldn't. But it's gonna happen. Either way, he's going.
Throughout the movie, we've cut back to Russell, Frank, and their wives on a road trip, and by this point, we've cut up to them in the timeline. It's here, in the last leg, that we see them in real time. It's eerily quiet as we travel up to Detroit and to the house where Jimmy will be killed. You can feel the tension and the nervousness. You're hoping that maybe, just maybe, Frank won't go through with it. Jimmy has no idea what's about to happen. He thinks that he's about to have another meeting with Tony Pro and Russell. He doesn't even suspect that Frank might be in on it.
You got your friend. Yeah, good. You never know what this cop's up.
So when what happens, it's devastating. Just a couple loud bangs, and then a return to eerie silence. I think if Martin Scorsese didn't have the creative freedom that he was given, the movie would have ended not too long after that moment. But thanks to that freedom, he's able to explore something that he's only been able to hint at in previous movies. Life after the mob. It's needless to say, it's not a happy one.
Why?
What?
Why?
By what?
Why haven't you called Joe?
There's been some criticism around Anna Paquin's role, that she literally only has one line in the entire movie. But I think that one line is one of the most crucial. Frank ultimately ends up alone, completely alienated from his daughters, with Peggy flat out refusing to talk to him.
Peggy, I just want to talk.
Not only that, but one by one, he watches as his so-called friends die in prison. In fact, he's one of the only ones to live long enough to end up in a nursing home. With no friends or family to see him, or even caring that he's still alive, he has to arrange his own funeral, including buying his own coffin. A green one amongst all the gray and brown. This is another smaller detail that I notice upon multiple viewings. At the beginning of the timeline, everything is vibrant and colorful, but then once Jimmy Hoffa is killed, the colors become dull and muted. It's a subtle bit of visual storytelling, one that's introduced rather abruptly with the prison sequence, but then once he gets out and the color scheme stays, you just realize how empty his life is. Frank Sheeran took the color out of his own life, with the only ray of light, the only thing he can focus on, the only thing with a speck of vibrance to it, being his coffin, that he will one day be put to rest in. The movie ends the way it starts, in the still of the night, with the song being used during the wedding of Bill Bufalino's daughter, which is where I think Martin Scorsese would have, like I said, ended the movie if he didn't have this creative freedom. However, the standout track is Remembrance by Robbie Robertson, who takes the harmonica chords of the movie's main theme and places it in this somber ballad. The Irishman is a masterpiece. Plain and simple. It's not just the story of a life. It's an epic that touches multiple threads, spinning a complex narrative of friendship, betrayal, and regret, all while some of the most significant events in 20th century America plays out in the background. I know I mentioned in my review of Joker that movie was my movie of 2019, but I think The Irishman dethrones it. There are moments that I could see why people think it's imperfect. There are moments that feel they go on a bit longer than they need to, and the CGI isn't always that great. That being said, I think the visual effects were definitely really well done, especially after learning about the technology that was used. But that's just one component. Everything about this movie, the direction, the performances from all the players, big and small, the writing, the music, all of these elements come together to create a truly once-in-a-lifetime experience. It's going to be a sad day when Scorsese, Pesci, Pacino, and De Niro are no longer with us. I think you can tell what rating I'm going to go for, but it feels a bit weird saying this out loud, but this movie is a total incrediblast. It's a phenomenal movie, even if the ending is rather depressing. But I think that ending was the type of ending that a movie like this needed. Martin Scorsese has been criticized that his movies glorify the mafia. I think when he made this, he knew that this would be his last contribution to the gangster genre. So he went out on this note. A very sad note, but it makes me hope that when I come to the end of my life, that the choices that I have made don't have me as lonely and full of regret as Frank Sheeran.